Jake Torres was beginning to think that signing up for the Galactic Institute's exchange program was a mistake, a big one. The kind of mistake that gets you eaten by something with too many teeth and not enough understanding of personal boundaries. He sat in the back row of advanced creature bonding, surrounded by 40 alien students who kept stealing glances at him like he was a museum exhibit. Which, to be fair, he kind of was. Humans were new to the galactic community, only 5 years in, and most species still weren't sure if humans were supposed to be taken seriously or kept as pets. Professor Quillnax clearly leaned toward the pet theory. The Veldorian stood at the front of the lecture hall, all 4 arms gesturing dramatically as he droned on about evolutionary compatibility matrices and psychic resonance fields. He looked like someone had taken a praying mantis, given it anger management issues, and stuffed it into a tweed jacket that cost more than Jake's spaceship ticket. And so, Quillnax announced, his mandibles clicking with barely concealed smugness, "We arrive at the practical portion of your education. Each of you will be assigned an apex predator from various death worlds across the galaxy. Your task is to achieve a successful bond using the techniques we have studied." A ripple of nervous energy passed through the classroom. Tikrith, the 8-tentacled Morpharian in the front row, turned a worried shade of purple. Meebling, who was basically a sentient pile of cosmic jello, jiggled anxiously. Quillnax's compound eyes swept across the room and landed on Jake. The professor's mandibles curved into what might have been a smile, if smiles usually preceded terrible news. "Mr. Torres," Quillnax said, drawing out the words like they tasted funny. "Given your species' limited evolutionary development and lack of natural telepathic abilities, I have selected a particularly suitable creature for you." Jake knew that tone. That was the universal tone of someone being a jerk while pretending to be helpful. He'd heard it from his high school gym teacher, his ex-girlfriend's mother, and now apparently from a bugman from the Veldor system. "How thoughtful," Jake said flatly. "Indeed." Quillnax pulled up a holographic display. "You will be bonding with a thornback razorclaw from Kepler 442b, a modest creature, barely sentient. I'm sure even a human can manage." The hologram showed something that looked like a cross between a bear and a porcupine, if both animals had been designed by someone who thought teeth were a personality trait. It had 6 legs, quills that probably doubled as projectile weapons, and eyes that suggested it was done with everyone's nonsense. "It eats rocks for fun," someone whispered behind Jake. "I heard one killed a Krellian combat squad," another voice added. Quillnax waved a dismissive hand. "Exaggerations. The thornback is one of the more docile species we have in the facility. For a Death World predator, of course." Jake looked at the hologram. The creature's file listed its temperament as aggressively territorial, its diet as anything that moves and several things that don't, and its bonding success rate as 12%. "Great, just great. Class begins tomorrow at dawn," Quillnax announced. "I suggest you all review your resonance chamber protocols and ensure your pheromone synthesizers are calibrated. Mr. Torres, do try not to get eaten. The paperwork is quite tedious." As the other students filed out, chattering nervously in 17 different languages, Jake stayed in his seat and stared at the hologram of his assigned death machine. 40,000 years of human evolution, he thought. 5 years in the galactic community, and here he was, about to become a cosmic statistic because a bug professor thought humans were adorable idiots. Tomorrow was going to be interesting. Or fatal. Probably both. Dawn on Theta Station came with artificial lighting that was somehow both too bright and not bright enough. Jake stumbled into the bonding facility, clutching what passed for coffee in this corner of the galaxy. It tasted like battery acid mixed with regret, but it was caffeinated, and that was all that mattered. The arena was enormous. A circular space with reinforced walls and energy barriers that hummed ominously. Observation decks ringed the upper levels, already filling with students who'd completed their bonding trials, and were apparently here for the entertainment value of watching their classmates potentially die. Professor Quillnax stood at the center of everything, all 4 arms crossed, looking like a disappointed parent at a school play where everyone forgot their lines. "Today," he announced, his voice amplified across the facility, "you will learn that bonding with apex predators requires precision, patience, and above all, respect for the scientific method. Observe." Tikrith was up first. The Morpharian oozed confidence as he entered the arena, his 8 tentacles manipulating a complex array of devices. He had a telepathic amplifier strapped to 3 of his appendages, a pheromone broadcaster on another, and what looked suspiciously like a stun baton on the rest. His assigned creature, a spine crawler from Andromeda 7, was released from its holding cell. It looked like a centipede that had been working out, all rippling segments and clicking mandibles. T-Krith activated his equipment, and the air filled with a high-pitched whine. The spine crawler took one look at T-Krith, screeched, and charged. What followed was 3 minutes of pure chaos. T-Krith ran in circles, tentacles flailing, screaming something that the translator rendered as, "I have made a terrible mistake." The creature chased him around the arena like a deadly game of tag while Professor Quillnax watched with the expression of someone whose expectations were being met perfectly. Eventually, handlers in protective suits stunned the spine crawler and extracted a traumatized Krith from under a bench where he'd wedged himself. "Inadequate resonance," Quillnax declared. Next, Meebling approached the arena with visible reluctance, which was impressive for a being without visible features. The gelatinous student had prepared by watching approximately 200 hours of bonding tutorials, and had brought notes, actual notes, printed on waterproof material. Meebling's creature was a shade maw, something that looked like living smoke with too many eyes. The bonding attempt lasted exactly 45 seconds before the shade maw decided Meebling looked like food, and tried to absorb him. Or her. Or them. Jake still wasn't sure about Meebling's pronouns, and this didn't seem like the right time to ask. The rescue team had to use specialized extraction equipment to separate them. Meebling emerged considerably smaller than before and was rushed to medical. 5 more students tried. 5 more students failed in increasingly spectacular ways. One got treed by her creature. Another managed to bond successfully for almost 30 seconds before the creature decided it didn't like the arrangement and ate his telepathic amplifier. Professor Quillnax watched it all with the satisfaction of someone whose entire worldview was being validated. After the 7th failure, he stepped into the arena himself. "Perhaps," he said, mandibles clicking with condescension, "a demonstration is in order. Observe proper technique." 2 handlers brought out a sedated creature, something furry and docile-looking. Quillnax made a grand show of approaching it slowly, activating various devices, speaking in soothing tones. The creature, drugged to its eyeballs, barely responded. "You see?" Quillnax announced to the class. "Calm, calculated, scientific. This is how bonding is achieved. Through careful application of proven methodologies and respect for evolutionary compatibility matrices." Jake, watching from the sidelines, kept his mouth shut. He'd seen his neighbor's kid bond with a feral cat using nothing but lunch meat and persistence. This whole production seemed wildly overcomplicated. "And now," Quillnax said, turning to Jake with barely concealed glee, "Mr. Torres, do try to follow the protocols. I would hate to lose our token human on such a simple exercise." Jake set down his terrible coffee and headed for the arena entrance. Behind him, he heard someone start a betting pool on how long he'd last. The over-under was 90 seconds. Jake stepped into the arena and immediately assessed the situation like any reasonable person would when facing something that could turn him into a light snack. The Thornback Razor Claw was being brought in through the far entrance, and it did not look happy about its accommodations. Up close, the creature was even more impressive than the hologram suggested. It was roughly the size of a grizzly bear, covered in overlapping plates of natural armor, with quills that bristled along its spine like a punk rocker's fever dream. Its 6 legs ended in claws that looked like they could open a spaceship hull, and its eyes held the kind of intelligence that suggested it was actively planning something unpleasant. Professor Quillnax's voice boomed across the arena. "Mr. Torres, I have taken the liberty of preparing the standard bonding equipment for you. The telepathic resonance chamber is calibrated to human neural patterns, though I must warn you that human baseline telepathy is, shall we say, underwhelming. The pheromone synthesizer has been loaded with compatibility profiles based on your species' limited olfactory communication. I suggest you begin with the prescribed greeting ritual, which involves—" "Yeah, I'm good," Jake interrupted. Quillnax's mandibles froze, mid-click. "I beg your pardon? I said I'm good." Jake set down the elaborate helmet device and stepped away from the pile of equipment that looked like it belonged in a sci-fi medical drama. "Thanks, though." A murmur rippled through the observation decks. This was apparently not standard procedure. "Mr. Torres," Quillnax said, his voice taking on the sharp edge of someone whose authority was being questioned. "The bonding protocols exist for your safety. I strongly advise." But Jake was already walking toward the Thornback, hands loose at his sides, posture relaxed. He'd spent enough time around nervous animals to know that confidence was half the battle. Predators could smell fear, and probably incompetence too. He stopped about 15 feet from the creature and gave a short, sharp whistle. Nothing fancy, just a basic, "hey there" whistle. The kind you'd use to get a dog's attention at a park. The Thornback's head snapped toward him. Its quills flattened slightly. Then, in a movement that made 40 alien students gasp simultaneously, it tilted its head to one side. Jake whistled again, a little lower this time, and made a casual gesture with one hand. The thornback took a step forward, then another. Its aggressive posture melted into something closer to curiosity. It approached Jake like it was investigating something interesting, not like it was sizing up prey. When it got close enough, Jake extended his hand slowly, letting the creature sniff it. The thornback's nostrils flared. Its eyes, which had been narrow with suspicion, widened slightly. Then it sat down. Just like that. 6 legs folded under it, quills completely relaxed, looking at Jake with an expression that could only be described as, "Okay, I'm listening." The silence in the arena was absolute. "Good boy," Jake said quietly, reaching out to scratch behind what he assumed was an ear. The thornback leaned into the touch and made a rumbling sound that was probably contentment. And that's when things got weird. From the holding cells that ringed the lower level of the facility, something roared. Then something else chirped. Then something else made a sound like a whale song crossed with a chainsaw. Within seconds, the entire facility erupted in a cacophony of animal noises. Creatures from a dozen different death worlds, species that had never shared a planet or an evolutionary tree, all started vocalizing at once. Not aggressive sounds, calling sounds. The kind of sounds animals make when they want attention. Red lights began flashing. Automated warnings blared in 17 languages. Containment protocol breach imminent. Multiple subjects displaying agitation. Handlers to stations. Jake looked around, confused. What's happening?" Professor Quillnax stared at him like he'd just divided by 0. "What did you do?" "I whistled?" "You whistled," Quillnax repeated, his voice hollow. In the holding cells, creatures were pressing against their barriers, trying to get closer to the arena. A void stalker, which was supposed to be one of the most dangerous predators in the facility, was making sounds that its handlers had never heard before. Sounds that, if Jake didn't know better, he'd call hopeful. "Emergency containment protocols activated," a mechanical voice announced. Energy barriers flickered to maximum strength. Armed handlers rushed into position. The thornback at Jake's feet looked up at him, then back at the commotion, then back at Jake. Its expression clearly said, "Are you going to do something about this?" Dean Horvath materialized on the observation deck, his crystalline body refracting the emergency lights into a disco ball of bureaucratic fury. "What in the name of the founding species is going on down there?" Professor Quillnax's 4 arms gestured wildly. "The human. He didn't use any equipment, he simply—" "I whistled," Jake offered helpfully. Every creature in the facility called back. Jake was starting to think he should have taken the pottery elective instead. The bonding arena had been cleared. Emergency protocols had been activated. And Jake Torres found himself sitting in what could only be described as an interrogation room. Except, instead of a single detective, he had approximately 15 different alien species staring at him like he was either a weapons-grade threat or the universe's weirdest magic trick. Professor Quillnax stood at the front of the room, all 4 arms gesturing frantically at a holographic display. "I demand a full molecular scan." The human clearly employed some form of illegal technology. Pheromone manipulation devices, subdermal telepathic amplifiers, perhaps even banned psychotropic aerosols. Dean Horvath, the crystalline administrator who looked like someone had carved a very angry person out of living diamond, held up one faceted hand. "We've already scanned him 3 times, Professor. There's nothing. No devices, no modifications, no technological enhancements of any kind." "Then scan him again," Quillnax insisted, his voice climbing an octave. "The readings must be incorrect. What we witnessed is scientifically impossible. Humans have minimal telepathic capability. Their pheromone production is rudimentary at best. There is no evolutionary mechanism by which they could achieve spontaneous bonding with multiple apex predators simultaneously." Jake raised his hand like he was back in high school. "Can I say something?" "No," Quillnax snapped. "Yes," Dean Horvath countermanded, his voice resonating like wind chimes in a thunderstorm. "Mr. Torres, perhaps you could explain what exactly you did in that arena." Jake shrugged. "I treated it like a dog." The room fell silent. 17 different species processed this information with varying degrees of confusion. A Vexillian researcher, who looked like a floating jellyfish with a doctorate, drifted forward. "What is dog?" "A dog," Jake said slowly, trying to figure out how to explain 10,000 years of domestication to aliens who apparently had never considered making friends with their local wildlife. "It's an animal from Earth. Used to be wolves. We domesticated them. Now they're our companions." "Domesticated," Quilnax repeated, his mandibles twitching. You enslaved a predator species? What? No. We befriended them. It was mutual. They got food and shelter, we got companionship and help with hunting. Win-win. The Vexillian researcher's tentacles quivered. You befriended pursuit predators? Voluntarily? Well, yeah. Also cats, which are ambush predators, and horses, which can kick hard enough to kill you. Oh, and falcons, which are basically tiny murder machines with wings. And we've got people who work with elephants, which weigh 6 tons and have killed more handlers than I probably want to know about. There's this thing called dolphin training, and those guys are actually kind of scary smart and have been known to— Stop, Dean Horvath said, his crystalline structure flickering with what might have been distress. Stop talking. But Jake was on a roll now. I mean, we've domesticated or trained pretty much everything that didn't immediately kill us. Sometimes things that did try to kill us. There's this guy in Florida who has a pet alligator. And don't even get me started on the Australian wildlife situation. Those people will try to make friends with anything. A Morpharian scientist who'd been taking notes looked up from her datapad. You're telling us that your species has a historical pattern of befriending dangerous predators? It's kind of our thing, Jake admitted. We've been doing it for like 40,000 years, maybe longer. We domesticated wolves while we were still living in caves and hitting things with rocks. Professor Quilnax made us sound like a tea kettle having an existential crisis. That's not how evolution works. Prey species avoid predators. They don't invite them into their dwelling spaces and give them names. Yeah, but we're not really prey species, Jake said. I mean, we're not predators exactly either. We're persistence hunters. We don't have to be the fastest or the strongest. We just have to outlast everything else. It's why we're good at marathons and bad at giving up on things that clearly hate us. Dean Horvath's internal light pulsed in a way that suggested he was reconsidering every decision that had led to this moment. Let me understand this correctly. Your species has been bonding with dangerous animals for 40 millennia? At minimum, Jake confirmed. Some scientists think we started even earlier. There's evidence that Neanderthals had wolf companions too, and they were around way before we were. And you do this without telepathy? Without pheromone manipulation? We just use body language, tone of voice, and positive reinforcement. You know, treats, praise, patience, basic training stuff. Jake pulled out his datapad and scrolled through his photo library. Look, here's my sister's dog. Her name is Princess Buttercup. She's a German shepherd, descended from wolves, literally bred to herd sheep and protect against predators. Now she wears sweaters and is afraid of the vacuum cleaner. He swiped to another image. This is my uncle's horse. That's a 1,200-pound animal that could cave in your skull with one kick. He rides it for fun on weekends. Another swipe. This is my neighbor's cat. It's a direct descendant of apex predators that hunted in the African savanna. Now it sits in sunbeams and judges people. The assembled scientists stared at the images like they were looking at evidence of a cosmic horror. The Vexillian researcher's tentacles drooped. Your species domesticated pursuit, predators, ambush predators, pack hunters, and megafauna for companionship. And pest control, Jake added. Cats are really good at killing rodents. Also emotional support. Dogs are great for mental health. Professor Quilnax sank into a chair, which required significant adjustment for his Veldorian anatomy. This explains nothing. Even with this insane evolutionary history, you should not have been able to bond with every creature in our facility simultaneously. Oh, that, Jake said. Yeah, I think they were probably just understimulated and bored. Animals need enrichment, social interaction. Most predators are actually pretty smart and get depressed in captivity if they don't have enough to do. Depressed, Quilnax repeated weakly. Sure, it's a whole thing. Zoos on Earth have entire departments dedicated to animal enrichment. You gotta give them puzzles, social time, novel experiences. Otherwise, they get stressed and develop behavioral problems. Jake gestured toward the facility. How long have some of those creatures been in holding cells? The researchers exchanged uncomfortable looks. Months, Dean Horvath admitted. Some of them years. They're research subjects, kept in optimal containment for safety purposes. Right, but who's playing with them? The silence was deafening. You're telling me, Jake said slowly, that you've got a facility full of intelligent apex predators, and nobody's giving them enrichment activities? They're dangerous, Quilnax protested. Interaction protocols require extensive safety measures and telepathic oversight. They're lonely, Jake corrected. That's why they all responded when I showed up. I wasn't trying to control them or scan their brains or whatever. I just treated the thornback like it was a living thing that wanted respect and attention. They all heard that, or felt it, however that works. Dean Horvath's crystalline form dimmed, then brightened, which Jake had learned meant he was thinking hard. Mr. Torres, are you suggesting that thousands of years of our bonding research has been fundamentally flawed? Jake considered this diplomatic minefield carefully. I'm suggesting that maybe you've been overthinking. Professor Quilnax made a noise that couldn't be translated into any known language. There's one way to test this hypothesis, Dean Horvath said, and the way he said it made Jake's stomach sink. We have a creature that has never been successfully bonded. It's killed 3 handlers and injured a dozen others. We keep it sedated 23 hours a day. If your methods have any validity, you should be able to bond with it. Jake had a sudden, vivid memory of his high school guidance counselor asking what he wanted to do with his life. Explore the galaxy, he'd said. Have adventures. He really should have been more specific about the kind of adventures. What kind of creature are we talking about? Jake asked, though he already knew he wasn't going to like the answer. Dean Horvath's light flickered in a way that might have been apologetic. A void stalker from Epsilon Eridani, maximum danger classification. We've never even been able to document its full capabilities because it tries to kill everyone who gets close enough to study it. Jake thought about his apartment back on Earth. His normal life. His decision to join an exchange program because he thought it would look good on a resume. Cool, he heard himself say. When do we start? Professor Quilnax looked at him with what might have been respect, or possibly nausea. It was hard to tell with mandibles. Tomorrow morning, Dean Horvath said. I'll have medical standing by, and a memorial prepared, just in case. Fantastic, Jake muttered. This is exactly how I wanted to spend my Tuesday. Jake didn't sleep well that night. Partially because Theta Station's artificial gravity made his bed feel like he was sleeping on a slightly wrong version of a mattress, but mostly because he'd spent 3 hours watching security footage of the Void Stalker doing things that violated several laws of physics, and at least one Geneva Convention. The creature was nightmare fuel. Pure, concentrated nightmare fuel. It looked like someone had taken a panther, crossed it with a deep-sea anglerfish, added extra joints in places joints shouldn't exist, and then gave the whole thing the ability to phase partially out of regular space. Its skin absorbed light, making it hard to look at directly. Its 6 eyes glowed with a bioluminescence that security footage suggested could hypnotize prey, and it had a mouth that opened sideways, vertically, and in at least one recording diagonally. The incident reports made for grim reading. Handler Vexlar. Severe lacerations, 3 broken limbs, psychological trauma requiring memory suppression. Handler Quillnorth. Complete system failure after creature somehow drained their bioelectric field. Handler, T-Cave. Eaten. Partially. The Void Stalker had apparently gotten bored halfway through, and left the remains as what the report clinically described as a message. Jake closed his datapad and stared at the ceiling of his quarters. I could just leave, he said to nobody. Catch a transport back to Earth. Tell everyone the cultural exchange didn't work out. Get a normal job, maybe accounting. Accountants don't get eaten by interdimensional predators. But even as he said it, he knew he wasn't going to run. Not because he was brave, Jake was pretty sure he was the opposite of brave, but because 40 alien species thought humans couldn't do this. Thought humans were cute little primitives who needed protection from the big scary galaxy. And Jake Torres had never been good at letting people underestimate him. He pulled up another file on his datapad, his personal photo collection from Earth. Pictures of animals. His childhood dog, Max, a golden retriever who'd been afraid of thunderstorms and loved tennis balls. His grandmother's ancient cat, Mr. Pickles, who'd lived to be 22 and had the attitude of a feudal lord. A video of a horse trainer he'd watched obsessively as a kid, working with a rescue horse that had been abused, slowly building trust over months of patient work. Humans had been doing this forever, making connections with creatures that should have been enemies, finding common ground with things that had teeth and claws, and every reason to want humans dead. If humanity could turn wolves into pugs, Jake figured he could at least try not to die. Morning came with artificial sunlight and a knot of dread in Jake's stomach that felt like he'd swallowed a bowling ball made of anxiety. The demonstration arena was different from the training facility. Bigger, more reinforced. The observation decks were packed with what looked like every scientist, administrator, and student on the station. Word had apparently spread. Jake spotted betting pools being organized in at least 3 different corners. Dean Horvath stood at the center of the arena floor, his crystalline body refracting the harsh lights into rainbow patterns. Mr. Torres, I want to be absolutely clear about what you're attempting. The creature you're about to face has a 100% hostility rating. Every encounter with it has ended in violence. We will have stun weapons trained on it at all times, but its physiology allows it to phase through certain energy barriers. If it decides to attack, we may not be able to stop it before it reaches you. Cool speech, Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady. Very motivating. Really settling my nerves. Professor Quillnax, who looked like he hadn't slept either, stepped forward with all 4 arms full of equipment. At minimum, you should wear the protective exosuit, and take the neural deadman switch, and perhaps the emergency teleporter. And, I'm good, Jake interrupted, though his brain was screaming that he absolutely was not good and should take all of those things immediately. You're insane, Quillnax said flatly. Probably, Jake admitted. But if I go in there covered in armor and weapons, what's the first thing that creature's going to think? That you're a threat, Dean Horvath said slowly, understanding dawning in his crystalline matrix. Exactly. I needed to think I'm not a threat. Which means I need to look like the least threatening thing in this room. Jake had spent the early morning hours planning this, and his plan was either brilliant or suicidally stupid. Possibly both. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out what he'd acquired from the station's commissary. A sandwich. Or rather, the alien equivalent something called a Nutri-Wrap that looked vaguely edible and supposedly contained protein. You're going to fight a void stalker with a sandwich, Quillnax said, his voice hollow. I'm not going to fight it at all, Jake corrected. I'm going to feed it. Before anyone could stop him or before he could talk himself out of it, Jake walked toward the reinforced containment cell at the far end of the arena. Through the translucent energy barrier, he could see movement. Shadows that moved wrong, eyes that glowed with an intelligence that felt predatory and ancient. The handlers looked at Dean Horvath. Dean Horvath looked at Jake. Then, with the air of someone watching a train wreck in slow motion, he nodded. The energy barrier deactivated, with a sound like reality unzipping. The Void Stalker emerged like smoke given form and malice. It was bigger than the footage suggested, maybe 7 feet at the shoulder, moving with a liquid grace that suggested it wasn't entirely bound by normal physics. Its skin drank in the light, creating a void-shaped hole in the world. Those 6 eyes locked onto Jake with an intensity that made his hindbrain scream, "Run." Jake did not run. Running triggered chase instincts. He'd learned that from watching nature documentaries. Instead, he sat down, just dropped cross-legged onto the arena floor like he was at a picnic, making himself smaller, less threatening. Every predator instinct key relied on movement, on fear responses, on prey behavior. Jake was going to be the most boring, non-prey-like thing this creature had ever encountered. The Void Stalker paused. Its head tilted in a motion that sent its extra joints bending in ways that made several observers nauseous. "Hey there," Jake said quietly, keeping his voice low and calm. Not scared calm. Actually calm. The kind of calm he'd used with Max during thunderstorms. "I know this place sucks. I know everyone here has been treating you like a science experiment. That's probably really frustrating, huh?" The creature took a step forward. Its claws scraped against the arena floor with a sound like knives on slate. Jake unwrapped the Nutri-Wrap slowly, deliberately, letting the smell waft out. "I bet the food here is terrible too. Everything tastes like recycled protein paste and sadness. Trust me, I get it. I've been eating station food for 3 months." Another step. The Void Stalker was close enough now that Jake could see the way its skin rippled, phasing partially between dimensions. Close enough that if it wanted to kill him, it could do so before anyone could intervene. Jake tore off a piece of the Nutri-Wrap and tossed it gently onto the floor, about 3 feet in front of him. Not at the creature that would be aggressive, just onto the ground, offering without demanding. The Void Stalker stared at the food, then at Jake. Its bioluminescent eyes pulsed in a pattern that might have been confusion. "You don't have to take it," Jake said conversationally. "No pressure. I'm just putting it out there. Consider it a gesture of goodwill from one prisoner to another. Because let's be real, they're keeping you in a box 23 hours a day. That's no way to live." The creature's posture shifted infinitesimally. The aggressive tension in its shoulders relaxed by maybe a millimeter. It leaned forward, sniffed the food, and in one quick motion, consumed it. Jake tore off another piece and tossed it slightly closer. The Void Stalker watched him for a long moment, then ate that piece too. In the observation deck, Professor Quillnax was gripping the railing with all 4 hands, his mandibles frozen open in shock. Dean Horvath's crystalline structure was flickering rapidly, which Jake had learned meant intense processing. "Good choice," Jake said, tearing off another piece. This time he held it in his open palm, arm extended but not reaching, letting the creature come to him. The Void Stalker regarded him with those glowing eyes. Jake could practically see it thinking, weighing options, calculating risks. Then, With a movement that was almost cautious, it stepped forward and took the food from his hand. Its teeth razor-sharp. Multiple rows of them brushed his palm with surprising gentleness. "There we go," Jake said softly. "See? Not so bad. Nobody's trying to sedate you or scan you or poke you with things. Just two beings sharing a meal." He spent the next 10 minutes doing nothing but feeding the Void Stalker small pieces of food, talking quietly, moving slowly. Gradually, the creature's defensive posture melted away entirely. It sat down, actually sat, like a dog waiting for dinner. Jake reached out slowly, telegraphing the movement, and scratched behind what he assumed was an ear. The Void Stalker leaned into the touch and made a sound that was somewhere between a purr and a subsonic rumble. "All right," Jake said, standing up carefully. "Let's try something." He took a few steps back and patted his leg. "Come here." The Void Stalker looked at him, then stood and walked over. "Sit. It's Saturday." Jake pulled out another piece of food and held it up. Paw. The creature extended one massive clawed appendage. Jake shook it solemnly, then gave it the treat. Over the next 5 minutes, Jake taught the most dangerous predator in the facility to sit, stay, and give all 6 of its paws on command. Each successful trick earned a piece of food and quiet praise. In the observation deck, several scientists were openly weeping. Professor Quillnax had sunk to the Scientidae floor, all 4 arms wrapped around himself. Dean Horvath's crystalline structure had stopped flickering entirely, frozen in what might have been a crash error. Jake looked up at them and shrugged. Positive reinforcement training. Works on everything from goldfish to elephants. Apparently also works on interdimensional murder cats. The Void Stalker, sitting obediently at his feet, made a happy rumbling sound and nuzzled his hand with its terrifying head. "Who's a good eldritch horror?" Jake said, scratching behind its ears. "You are?" "Yes, you are." Somewhere in the observation deck, someone fainted. Jake was pretty sure it was Professor Quillnax. 3 weeks later, Jake Torres sat in what used to be Professor Quillnax's office and was now, apparently, Jake's office. The nameplate on the door read, "Interspecies Bonding Consultant" in 17 languages, and he still wasn't sure how that had happened. The Galactic Institute had moved quickly once word got out. Too quickly, in Jake's opinion. One day he was a struggling exchange student, trying not to fail xenobiology. The next, he was somehow the facility's chief creature consultant, with a salary that made his eyes water and a job description that essentially boiled down to, "Fix 3,000 years of us doing this wrong." Professor Quillnax sat across from him, taking notes. The former instructor had been demoted or promoted, depending on how you looked at it, to Jake's assistant. He'd taken it surprisingly well, though Jake suspected that was mostly shock that hadn't worn off yet. "The spine crawler from Arena 6 has stopped displaying aggressive behavior," Quillnax reported. His mandibles clicking in what Jake had learned was his thoughtful expression. "After you implemented the enrichment protocols and social interaction schedule, its stress hormones dropped by 73%. "Cool," Jake said, reviewing the schedule on his datapad. "What about the Shade Maw?" "Bonded successfully with Meebling yesterday. They appear to have formed what your notes describe as a friendship. Meebling has regained their previous mass and reports feeling happier than they have in cycles." Jake nodded, checking off another item on his increasingly long to-do list. The facility had over 200 creatures in residence, and he was systematically working through behavioral assessments for each one. Turns out most of them weren't actually dangerous. They were stressed, bored, and treated like objects instead of living beings. It was like walking into an animal shelter where nobody had ever heard of the concept of animal welfare. Dean Horvath materialized in the doorway, his crystalline form refracting the office lights. "Mr. Torres, we have a situation." Jake looked up warily. The last time Dean Horvath had said they had a situation, it involved a delegation from the Andromedan Council, who wanted to know why the human had managed to do in 3 days what their best scientists couldn't do in 3 decades. That meeting had lasted 6 hours and involved a lot of very uncomfortable questions about galactic research ethics. "What kind of situation?" "The Medical Council has requested your presence. Apparently, there's been a development with the Thornback Razorclaw." Jake's stomach dropped. The Thornback, who he'd been calling Spike because giving things names made them less scary, had been doing great. "Is he okay?" "He's fine. More than fine, actually. He's displaying behaviors we've never documented before." Dean Horvath's light pulsed in what might have been amusement. "He won't eat unless you're present. He's been sitting by the door to your quarters for the past 4 hours. The handlers are concerned he may have imprinted on you." "Imprinted," Jake repeated. "It's a psychological bonding phenomenon where—" "I know what imprinting is," Jake interrupted. I just wasn't expecting it from a 600-pound death lizard. Quillnax looked up from his notes. This raises interesting questions about the nature of cross-species attachment. In my research, I theorized that such bonds required telepathic compatibility, but clearly you were wrong about a lot of things, Jake said, not unkindly. Quillnax had actually been helpful once he'd gotten over his wounded pride. Turned out the professor genuinely cared about the creatures. He'd just been taught completely backwards methods for interacting with them. Jake stood up, grabbing his jacket. All right, let's go deal with my apparently clingy apex predator. As they walked through the facility corridors, Jake noticed the changes that had happened over the past few weeks. The holding cells had been redesigned with enrichment features, climbing structures, puzzle feeders, social interaction windows. The constant alarm sounds had stopped. The creatures weren't constantly sedated anymore. Several of them looked up as Jake passed, making friendly noises. The Thornback was indeed sitting by Jake's quarters, looking like a puppy whose owner had been gone for 5 minutes instead of 4 hours. When Spike saw Jake, his quills flattened in happiness and he made a warbling sound that was probably joy. "Hey, buddy," Jake said, kneeling down to scratch behind Spike's armored head. "Miss me?" The Thornback leaned into the touch and rumbled contentedly. Dean Horvath observed this with his usual crystalline inscrutability. "The Council is concerned about the implications of your methods spreading throughout the galaxy. If other facilities adopt your protocols, it could revolutionize how we interact with xenofauna across thousands of worlds." "Good," Jake said simply. "Maybe then you'll stop treating living creatures like lab equipment." "The Council is also concerned," Dean Horvath continued, "about humanity's place in the galactic community. Your species has been with us for only 5 years, and already you're overturning established scientific paradigms. Some Council members find this troubling." Jake looked up from petting Spike. "Troubling how?" "There's a debate about whether humans should be classified as a potential threat species." Dean Horvath's light dimmed slightly. "A species that can befriend any predator, that spent 40,000 years domesticating everything it encountered, that apparently cannot resist the urge to make companions out of creatures that should be their natural enemies. Some find that concerning. Because we're good at making friends? Because you're good at making friends with things that could kill you. The Council is trying to determine if this is a survival adaptation or a species-wide psychological disorder." Jake stood up, brushing creature fur off his pants. "You want to know what I think? I suspect you're going to tell me regardless. I think your problem isn't that humans are weird. I think your problem is that the entire galaxy has been so focused on analyzing and categorizing and controlling everything that you forgot the most basic principle of dealing with other living things, which is, treat them like they matter, like they're individuals with their own feelings and needs and personalities, not like problems to solve or resources to exploit. Just like beings worthy of respect." Jake gestured around the facility. "Every creature in here is smarter than you gave them credit for. They don't need telepathic resonance chambers and pheromone synthesizers. They need someone to actually see them and treat them with basic dignity." Dean Horvath was quiet for a long moment, his internal light pulsing thoughtfully. "The Council wants you to write a comprehensive guide to your methods. They're calling it the Torres Protocols. It will be distributed to every major institution in the galaxy." "That's a terrible name. Nevertheless, you've started something, Mr. Torres. The question now is where it leads." Jake looked down at Spike, who was gazing up at him with 6 eyes full of contentment and trust. He thought about all the creatures in the facility who were happier now, healthier now, because someone finally bothered to treat them like living beings instead of data points. "I guess we'll find out," Jake said. Later that evening, Jake sat in his quarters writing the introduction to what was apparently going to be the galaxy's new standard for creature interaction. Spike was curled up on a specially reinforced bed in the corner, snoring in a way that rattled the walls slightly. His datapad chimed with an incoming message from Earth. His sister. "Hey Jake, how's the fancy space school? Mom wants to know if you're eating enough vegetables. Also, Princess Buttercup learned a new trick. She can high-five now. Miss you." Attached was a video of his sister's German Shepherd descended from wolves, engineered by humans over thousands of years, performing a perfect high-five for a treat, her tail wagging with pure joy. Jake smiled and typed back, "Space school is weird. Tell Mom the vegetables here are questionable, but I'm surviving. Give Princess Buttercup scratches from me. Things are going pretty well, actually. Turns out humanity's weird obsession with befriending everything is useful out here. Who knew?" He hit send and went back to his report. He was writing the section on positive reinforcement when another message came through, this time from Dean Horvath. "Mr. Torres, the Andromedan Council has officially requested your presence at their headquarters. They want to discuss implementing your protocols across their entire research network. Also, there's a species from Kepler 62 that has been unable to bond with their native fauna and has requested human consultation. You're becoming quite famous. Or infamous. The council is still debating which. Jake stared at the message, then at Spike, sleeping peacefully in the corner, then at his datapad where he'd been trying to explain 40,000 years of human-animal relationships in a way that wouldn't make the galactic community question whether letting humans join was a massive mistake. He thought about his guidance counselor, asking what he wanted to do with his life. Explore the galaxy, he'd said. Have adventures. Careful what you wish for, he thought. But as he looked around his quarters at the sleeping Thornback who decided Jake was his person, at the messages from facilities across the galaxy asking for help, at the report that would probably change how billions of beings interacted with the creatures on their worlds, Jake had to admit that this was pretty much exactly the kind of adventure he'd hoped for, just with more interdimensional murder cats than he'd anticipated. He pulled up a fresh document and started typing. Chapter 1, Introduction to the Torres Protocols, or How Humanity Accidentally Revolutionized Xenobiology by Treating Animals Like They Have Feelings, by Jake Torres, who really just wanted to pass his xenobiology course and is honestly still confused about how this became his job. Let me start by explaining something about humans that apparently nobody in the galaxy understood. We domesticated wolves while we were still living in caves and hitting things with rocks. Spike snored loudly. Jake smiled and kept writing. Somewhere on the other side of the galaxy, Professor Quilnax was probably already preparing citations and footnotes for the formal academic version. But this version, Jake decided, was going to be honest. Because if the galaxy was going to adopt human methods, they needed to understand the most important lesson humanity had learned, over 40,000 years of making friends with things that had teeth. Sometimes the scariest creatures just need someone to see them as more than monsters. Sometimes they just need a friend. And sometimes, the best technology in the universe is a sandwich and the willingness to sit down and treat another living being with basic respect. It wasn't complicated science. It was just being decent. Humanity had figured that out a long time ago. The rest of the galaxy was just catching up.